Good morning and welcome to the New South Wales Policy Professionals webinar series, and it's 2024. And as host of the meeting today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are on and acknowledge that this is Aboriginal land wherever you may be joining us from. We have a very interesting webinar today from Liquor and Gaming and the 24-Hour Economy Commissioner talking about vibrancy reforms. And I'll introduce the speakers, but just to get us started and thinking about this issue, we've in the New South Wales government, we normally have a full legislative program to take to our parliament. And I think we are going to have lots of opportunity to put into practice some of the learnings from today in being able to do very thorough but rapid policy reform in the future. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that, and I think there'll be some excellent learnings. We heard recently from Parliamentary Council's office on what it's like to work with them, and I think that was late last year. So if you want to check back on some of our previous webinars, there will be some other material there that will be really useful for you if you were in this situation. To introduce our speakers, we have with us Michael Rodrigues, who's the 24-Hour Economy Commissioner. He was the first 24-Hour Economy Commissioner appointed in 2021. And you have such a fun title, Michael. I know you're a passionate advocate for this area, for nightlife culture and the economy during the night hours. I don't know whether that means you're a night owl. I have noticed on LinkedIn you're popping up all over the place, so perhaps that's part of the job, or I expect it's something that you're really passionate about. And you launched the global lifestyle brand Time Out in Sydney in 2007 and served as managing director until 2021, and the Nighttime Industry Association, which you founded in 2018 and served as chair until 2021. Michael is also a trained lawyer who lives in Sydney with his wife and two daughters, and he's definitely got an excellent cocktail list. Natalie Wright is from Liquor and Gaming in New South Wales and is responsible for delivering policy reform across the liquor and gaming industries, as well as digital and emerging technologies for the hospitality and racing group. She's also been Director of Policy and Research at Liquor and Gaming since mid-2022 and has previously worked in gambling harm prevention in a range of government portfolios and non-government organisations, including infrastructure, tourism, events, food, liquor, gambling regulation, and she holds a Bachelor of Arts in Communications and is a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. Now, all of that I'm sure put you in very good stead for the work that you now have to do, Natalie. I'm going to just hand over to our speakers to talk further about the vibrancy reforms, and then we'll be having a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. So I'll put some instructions in the chat about how to get involved in that when we get a bit closer to it.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Louisa. And I am going to attempt to share a PowerPoint. Let's see how we go. Fingers crossed.
Nabil.
Yes, we can see that.
Yeah, and the thing I like about this slide mainly is that people often ask, is that Daniel Mookie in our the Treasurer in the foreground? I can't confirm or deny that, but it was, when we were doing some of the stakeholder consultation, it was a good way of distracting people. So I'm just coming to you on Gadigal land, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I'm sure we're on many lands today. So I acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders joining us for this, what I hope is a entertaining and informative session. The joy that I have with my job, I had to explain last year to people in the industry that I can give you the long story or the short story. The long story is the vibrancy reform agenda across 6 themes, which I'll come to. The short story is we're making your life better. Can you just let us get on with it? And It was the first time that I'd done any regulatory reform, and I think that acknowledging other things is that I don't know that I describe myself as a policy professional, and maybe that will come through in the presentation. My background, while being a lawyer and so forth, I've never, sort of like had a focus on formal policy development, really. I just saw a world that I didn't like and thought I want to go change it. And so how do I go do that? And that's sort of been my entry to it. So forgive me if I am not calling things by the right names, or not using the professional vernacular for what it is you do as professionals, but I'm glad that you know what you're doing. And Nat can explain herself in due course. To give you a bit of a sense of how we're planning to do this, is I'll speak a little bit at the maybe for 5 or 10 minutes, and then Nat will basically take over, and then we'll throw it open to questions. And I think I was quite one thing I've learned actually as part of this, and it will come through, is that while we sit in different teams, the relationship that we've been able to build with the hospitality and racing team, Nat in particular, and Tarek, and the many policy people there, has been a real example of what happens when you have close partnerships, and that has really underpinned the work that we're going to talk to you about today. So for those who aren't as familiar as I am, being fully immersed in it, New South Wales is a bit unique. We're the only central government anywhere on the planet that has a 24-hour economy strategy, or if you prefer nighttime economy as a way of defining it, then even places like London and New York, the slight difference is that they are kind of city-based agendas as opposed to full central government. The reason I'm talking about this is that it really sets out the vision for a vibrant, fun, safe nighttime economy, something that the incoming Labor government and the Premier himself expressed, which we'll come to, but really his vision for a city that sees itself free of red tape, that gets in the way of fun. So some of the things, this was not a new policy agenda, I think is probably the first point I'm trying to tease out here. There was quite a bit of thinking in it. However, the specific election commitments, that some of which are listed there, really served as a foundation for how we would be able to reinvigorate a process of regulatory reform. And That we'll talk about this, but there was an existing piece of work that had already been initiated by the liquor and gaming team. And either of its own stead or in line with the vision in the strategy. So when the Minns government took over, there was it wasn't from a cold start. One of the first priorities, really, and again, you might do this day in, day out. For me, it was a relatively new experience, was really trying to define the problem we were trying to solve for. Something that the Minister Graham put fairly and squarely on my shoulders initially to try and come up with it. And I sweated it for a while because it's a complicated area, but we were able to, I guess, break it down this way, that over a period of time, what we'd essentially caused to occur in New South Wales was overlapping regulation that was inconsistently administered, and with varying enforcement practices across multiple agencies, all of which was conspiring to restrict venue establishment, operation and adaptation, and the use of public space for entertainment and performance. So as you'll come in on see, there's a whole bunch of regulation and many agencies that are involved, but getting to the crux of it, that was the problem that we were trying to solve for. And that problem had, I guess, consequences for different stakeholders, for state and local government, inefficient administration, reputational issues, restricted economic and cultural development. If you were businesses, it was uncertainty about working in New South Wales when it comes to our sector, or not ideal levels of certainty that allows them to invest, and that's capital inefficiency. So I'm trying to fix that. And then if you're a citizen, just reduced amenity of your own city. So I guess maybe one of the things is just I don't know, Natalie, but I spent a lot of time just trying to get this right, and then working it out across the various partners that I'll talk about now. 24-hour economy or nighttime economy is almost like everywhere and nowhere. Like it really touches on so many aspects of government that if you start trying to take a problem like the one we've identified and solve for it, you very quickly realise that you have multiple stakeholders that you need to engage with. And this may be a little bit technical, but I gather it's kind of, and Louisa, I guess, maybe touched on in her opening remarks that the impetus was catalysed by election commitments. At ministerial level, and I like telling this story actually because it's maybe it was a career highlight or low light. I'm not really sure, but it was one of those moments where I had to pinch myself walking out of the Premier's office boardroom where I just convened a meeting as chair with the Cabinet Office, which had, I think, 5 ministers at it, 5 secretaries and the Police Commissioner at it, where we outlined the ambition that we were trying to achieve. So Minister Graham essentially convened a subcommittee. It wasn't formally called that, but Planning Minister, Minister Harris, Police Minister, and I can't recall. I don't know if the Minister for Transport was there, but either way, there was senior level ministers, and then almost Secretary Mulwater played a similar role at secretary level across all the departments, convening her group, and then myself with the Cabinet Office, Lucy Hardis, for those of you who know her, ultimately convened the steering committee. And then below that, it was a working committee, a working group. But I don't know whether this is a normal way of doing it. What we found was really useful was that the Cabinet Office just had a power to convene, and particularly when you have police and health, involved, we found that really quite useful. And then it was almost like these forums continued to be maintained in real time at 3 or 4 levels, and we had report back functions, and it was the ministers. We didn't convene as much, but that was happening reasonably regularly. So I thought that was pretty interesting. It took years off my life. By the way, I think I forgot to mention that this sort of all happened. March was the election. June we were told, and by December we'd had legislation through the House. So it was kind of, I guess, fast tracked. I think then, just so you have an understanding about what we're talking about, we split the reforms into these themes, which were a bit arbitrary in some ways, but probably spoke to a process that was iterative with how we'd present this to media and the value proposition to the consumer. Noise and sound, and the soundbite that the minister came up with was something like, the great sport of moving in next to a venue and shutting it down is now over in the state of New South Wales. So we had this kind of through line through to media and how that was shaping policy. I thought that was quite interesting. Vibrant coordinated precincts brought together the work that our team was doing, the work that the active transport and cities team were doing into, I guess, a bit more of a singular vision. Activated outdoors, the good things from the pandemic that we learned through our fresco, how do we hang on to those? And then I guess also, an abhorrence of how much it costs to close a street down each time you want to use it for something other than driving cars on. 2 concepts there. We got a bit of a lift with all of this. The government are committed to making our office permanent, and as the minister wanted me to have some special powers, so or the person who sits in this seat, and then Nat will talk a little bit more about streamlined contemporary licensing, but that was the existing sort of bulk of work that had already been done. And then nothing like a curveball at the last minute, but the minister introduced a new policy idea around nighttime workers, which there was no real regulation attached to this, but it just formed part of the wider narrative for the agenda. I think, and partly just so I can pass over to Nab, 3 of the key areas that our office continues to work and lead really are these: our own appointment and what it means, the 24-hour workforce piece, which has really become a policy piece that we're working on at the moment, and then the delivery of these vibrant and coordinated precincts, which are really a bit of a job share between us and the Department of Planning, but we're trying to concierge it. So I think that this slide is just simply to make sure that you don't lose sight of where pieces of the narrative have gone. So the Vibrancy Reform agenda contained all of those 6 things. These 3 things kind of sit in our area more so, but then the other elements are being implemented by other agencies, which is my segue, I think, to pass over to Nat. I think, Nat, do you want me to keep pushing the slides, or do you want to take control or something? I don't know.
I think I can take control. Let me see. I'll hit that button and see what it does. Yes, excellent. It worked. Hi, everyone. So look, as Mike said, this was a really rapid piece of work that we had to progress really quickly. So as Mike mentioned, those election commitments were sort of our driver in terms of the themes and the priorities that we were looking at. One of the great things that just sort of happened, and I don't think this happens very often, is we had in the previous year, under the previous government, released what was called a liquor licence discussion paper, and it was an 80-page document looking at streamlining, reducing red tape right across our liquor licensing framework. So what that really enabled us to do was we'd consulted with stakeholders, we'd consulted with the community, we had feedback on a lot of proposals that we'd put forward previously. And so what we were able to do was go through all of that work and pick out the bits of, sort of change that would also advance the new government's agenda. So one of the great things was that we were able to put those reforms in pretty quickly without having to go through another really in-depth consultation process. We did consult, and I'll touch on that a little bit later, but really that's what enabled us to move through everything really quickly. So one of the examples that I really wanted to talk about, which is a really key reform, was regulation of noise and sound. So one of the election commitments was around streamlining noise and sound complaints process. And the Minister Graham often quoted the fact that there were 7 government agencies in New South Wales that were involved in regulating venue sound. And so we really had to look at what the issue was and work our way through it. And really, we ran through collaboratively with Mike's team and really looked at a range of options that we could look at. Of course, no one agency really wants to put up their hand to regulate something if they're not going to get the resources to go with it. So that was a particular challenge as well. And I think once we really looked at all of the restrictions that were holding live music back in terms of the complaints process, we ended up landing on a policy solution, which was for liquor and gaming to take over noise complaint at licensed venues in New South Wales. Local councils still play a role in special entertainment precincts that the 24-hour economy team is setting up. But really, we've taken charge of that, that regulation, not without challenge, and it's a really huge undertaking to be able to do that across the state. So I guess one of the key things we're really looking at now is how we can implement that in the way that it was intended. One of the other things is that this really had support across the board. So whilst, we do have that often the single neighbour shutting down a venue, we still needed to make sure that community obligations were being met as well. So we do have that balancing role, and we haven't cut the community out of the process. They're still a really important part of the process, but we've put a lot of emphasis on mediation and sorting out the issues before they actually get to complaint stage. So this is the one policy area that hasn't commenced yet, despite the legislation passing last year, and it's due to commence from the 1st of July this year. And I think what the sort of time frame has enabled us to do is really work through that detail in how it will work in practice and work with our operational areas. So all well and good to get the policy settings right, but to me, the really important part is also how it's implemented. I touched on this on the previous slide, but really we had this discussion paper that we'd released that proposed a number of reforms, and really they were aimed to support the 24-hour economy and modernise our liquor licensing system. We weren't able to implement everything in this tranche of Vibrancy because some of the concepts and areas either had really mixed feedback from stakeholders or they needed further work. So we're often referring it now to Vibrancy Tranche 2, which will be sort of the next piece of work once we have all of this implemented. And I think, for us, this work is going to continue. We continue to get feedback from licensees and the industry about what doesn't work, also from the community about their concerns. And so the ability for us to keep momentum on this reform agenda in this space is quite positive, and I think we'll probably see some more change. If it's not later this year, it'll be next year. I think I mentioned around the implementation. So we had, I can't remember how many pages the bill was, but it amended like 6 different pieces of legislation. It was pretty hefty, and actually trying to keep track of all of these reforms when we were in Parliament was really interesting. And the team that the policy team that did all this work in my area were really fantastic in just being across the detail. Now, one of the other things I wanted to mention was really the communication throughout the policy development process was so important. So I mentioned we had that community consultation previously, but we also, in getting the reforms through Cabinet and then drafting the bill, we continued that consultation all the way through. Because it was so rapid, we had to do that. And there were also some decisions made along the way to remove some aspects, really because, they were too contentious, or we really hadn't thought them through enough. So I think for us, it was a real recognition that whilst you might have been working on things for quite a long time, once the rubber hits the road, you still do encounter issues as you go through. And then the third part was really around once we got the bill through Parliament, really communicating in, basic terms to these businesses about what incentives they could take up, what the benefits were going to be for them as well. And because we went through pretty quickly, the minister's goal was to really have a lot of this in place prior to the summer period, so that businesses had that opportunity to take up live music incentives and other aspects, extended trading hours that would enable them to really, sort of build their business in the lead up to Christmas. So I think we've had some really good runs on the board there. Live music venues get an 80% discount on their liquor licence fees. They also get 2 hours of extended trading if they put on live music. And we've seen already that uptake really, really grow since the legislation came into effect.
Welcome to FCM Travel. Please note that your call may be monitored.
Okay, you might want to mute yourself, FCM Travel. So we've got a slide here. Mike and I will probably both talk to this one, but really, I'm preaching to the converted here about how to, you know, work on policy. But I think for us, we learnt some really good lessons through this process. And I think Mike had already highlighted that using the layers of government. So I don't know if you want to talk to that a bit, Mike.
No, but what I might say is that, and again, relatively new to government and not having done a process like this before, is that, and to be fair, like, it was such an intense work period, I recall now, I think I buried half of it in my brain, so I didn't have to confront it again. But like I found in government it's quite hard to go between you know, your own department and to an MO. There's always these processes. You go by the secretary, you go by, you know, and it sort of, so much time gets lost in process. What was happening with this was that it was done in almost real time. So, and I think I don't know whether that's normal or not, but there was a fair bit of collaboration between, for example, our Minister's Office and the Premier's Office and other MOs. And by the end of the process, it would not be odd for our MO to be just in a meeting with, you know, either Tarek or Nat from Liquor and Gaming, with no one from our team there, and so, you know, like that type of thing. So maybe it's something that might be questions in, and I don't know whether that's partly because my role as commissioner it means that, you know, I can just kind of wander around government at large, and even into media as well. Like, those sorts of things may be a bit unique about this situation, but maybe that's for questions or other. Sorry, Nat, I don't know if you want any
No,
thoughts.
that's all right. I mean, I think the real points that I wanted to make was it was rapid, it was fast, we were going to make some mistakes, and I think just having that early recognition that might happen. You can have best endeavours, but when it's that fast, as Mike said, from June we had, you know, from the start of the policy development phase, we had ledge in Parliament through by the end of November. We knew that we were going to make those mistakes along the way, and I think acknowledging that was important. And I think some of the initiatives that we put forward you know, might be considered a bit risky, but we thought we may as well try some of these initiatives. If they don't work, we know we've got the opportunity after an evaluation to come back again and fix them. And I know most people don't say that about legislation because it's often really difficult, but in this sense, we really needed to demonstrate that we could deliver on the government's reform agenda. The other thing is that that earlier piece of work that I talked about, where we did community consultation on a whole raft of changes that we were proposing, we really listened to the community and what they were saying. And I think some of the small changes that we made that weren't the biggest focus of the vibrancy reforms, but will help, you know, a particular sector of the industry. You know, we really sort of tried to make those changes where we could as well, to really make sure where they make sense, may as well make them. So that was really, I think, the key learnings that we had. And as Mike said, that sort of work across government. I've been in government for pretty much all my time in my career, and that was really the most collaborative I've probably seen it in terms of agencies working together towards, you know, delivering on the reforms. So. And I think that is really it, and we are ready for questions.
Thank you. That was a really interesting presentation, and I loved how you integrated some policy theory in it as well, which was nice to see theory and practice coming together. If you have questions, our audience, hello. If you have questions, please pop them in the chat and I'll coordinate those questions. And when it's time for your turn, I'll ask you to turn your camera on and ask your question. So just to get us started while people are thinking and typing their questions, I'll start with one or two. We'll see. And I thought, Michael, it was really interesting that you said you're not a policy professional. Clearly, you've had to gain those skills on the job, but as policy professionals, we often draw on other skills or life experience. And I wondered about what skills and experience you'd drawn on in particular, do you think, that has now made you a successful policy professional?
I mean, like, I guess I'm a subject matter expert for government on going out, and which I think people sometimes struggle with that concept, actually. Like, oftentimes I find myself saying to people, just because you can eat a burger does not make you an expert on going out. Like, understanding the industry and having the credibility to walk into rooms from, that span hospitality, arts, culture, entertainment, is a career worth of work. And so I think that, in terms of this process, and so there's a question in the chat about engagement, although it's specific to community. We work so closely across that broad range of industry that it's almost like they had faith in the reform process. And as Nat has indicated, particularly the licensed venue space had already been engaged with liquor and gaming. So that's probably one aspect. The other bit is, and I probably made a hatchet of it trying to explain it, but power to convene, power to understand, the interests of different stakeholders. So I say, just calling it out in this particular instance, because it comes up so often, we, and is our role at odds with what the police are trying to achieve? Well, that's the how people sometimes sort of approach it. But of course, the response is that we all share a common interest in wanting to make sure people can remain safe when they go out. And so, it's that empathy component, and then detailed understanding of organisational structures and the stakeholders that you need to be speaking to make sure that that message is being communicated through at all times. For example, health weren't at the initial meeting for the, I think it's secretary level, but we had the meeting and we said, hang on a second, we're missing a key person here. We need New South Wales Health involved, and so we went to them and brought them on board. I think a lot of what I'm describing probably goes in the category of soft skills, and I don't know. Oftentimes, just being candid, because it's my particular brand, I find that in dealing with different agencies, sometimes people are just so singular in their focus, they can't see the world through any other lens, and it's and we get, inverted commas, consulted on things all the time, but really what the consultation process is about is trying to get you to tick a box and say, I don't have any objections with that. But to really to get to that outcome, it just requires deep understanding and empathy. And then I'm using that policing example. We did a lot of the stakeholder engagement, and I gave the police my word that whenever we were doing engagement, we would be making sure that it was clear that we weren't, that safety remained a priority of these reforms. So I think there's probably a couple of things in there that might be of interest. I keep talking about the media side of it. The other thing too is that in order to get, I guess, Parliament comfortable with it, there needed to be a pretty strong media strategy in the public domain. And what that, my own impressions of that was about was the litmus test that would give parliamentarians the confidence that the community was on board with it, and the learning really was that the noise and sound pieces where we thought the conflict would be. And so there's a media strategy behind all of this where we would be having the argument, so to speak, or the debate or the fight, is the language that people like to use, around NIMBYism and wowzers and all of that type of thing. what happened in practice is that, there was very little public resistance to the concept. And, for those who are interested in my insights on it, I think that it comes down to simply this, that on one hand, you have someone saying, I can't get to sleep at night. And on the other hand, we have a community that's saying, I don't have a place to sleep at night. That's the millennial housing challenge. And those two things, I think, are playing out around this agenda. So the role of media in all of this, I think, is another thing that I don't know whether people who are on the call actually have that much visibility of the impact of that process and the public testing that was kind of going on concurrent with the development.
We now have a question from Dost. So you've touched on consultation, but Dost, would you like to come on and ask your question specifically about community consultation?
Thank you. I think Michael answered that question. It's one of those areas, with communities is difficult, and I think he elaborated that, you have the other stakeholders, and then perhaps at a tier level, those stakeholders would perhaps be consulting with the community and then providing that feedback to you. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Both asked the question and answered it. Excellent. Nanda Kumar, you've asked about transport policy in this work. Nanda Kumar, would you like to come on?
I can maybe speak to the transport side of things if
yes, that's good. Yep.
I think there's probably two layers to it. Technically, I think that the active cities and transport team located within transport for some of the some of the use of roads, really. So that there was they were a participant for the purposes of the reforms. But I think more broadly, maybe the question's about how does we're increasing basically we're increasing capacity in the city for it to trade when it comes to nightlife. That's what the reforms are about. Extending trade, for example, and is there thinking around public transport supporting increased usage? I think might be partly where the question is going. And I think there is thinking, but not necessarily as part of this deliberate action around that. But the 24-hour economy strategy that I oversee has a key pillar, which is really around mobility and transport. And one of the things that we haven't talked about on this call, and I'm happy to sort of delve into it for a couple of minutes, is how do you measure the success of the reforms, right? Like that's the other piece of it. And really, because of, and for those who aren't so familiar, this is a very touchy subject because of the lockout law era in Sydney. And so what our office had done was commence a project about 18 months ago on a first of its kind globally on data measurement that really brings in a single dashboard key, I guess, what some might attribute as being positive data, i.e. increased mobility, expenditure, the demographics, the enjoyment of space, alongside crime data and ambulance call-out data, for example, as being a measure of how are you bringing back vibrancy but not compromising public safety. So we have a data platform being built, and we're sort of needing to morph it specifically to be able to make sure that the intent of the vibrancy reforms is over a long period honoured, and that we don't see a return to that pre-lockout era in Sydney. So I mentioned that Nanda Kumar, partly because it's the evaluation approach and measurement is tied into the data piece, but also that data platform is how we will baseline over time how the city is being used, where the action is, and therefore help use that to inform transport solutions, such as timetabling, because, for example, Brookvale Arts District is really popular and people are going there. So what transport needs you can see in real time, the demand for that. So that's a longer conversation. But if there's anyone here from transport, look forward to engaging with you.
Michael, I just wanted to add one more thing. There's a lot of good work which is done by the Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research in evaluation. Many of these liquor laws they've done, I was also involved in this previously. For 10 years, I ran the Secure Taxi Ranks project. That's why I put my hand up to talk to you. And I worked very closely with the Sydney City Council. Libby Harris is the manager at that time. And I'm still with transport. But that's the reason I put this question to you. Boxer can assist, and then they can also give you what data to be collected right in the beginning. It assists you in your evaluation, short, medium, long term. That's the reason why I put that evaluation question as well. Public transport options, as you said, timetabling, nighttime, is it safe, secure? This point came up some years ago, but then they said it is expensive. What somebody damages a train, it's running into billions. So, so that's the thing. And then how to fund this? Can you bring the liquor accord in, and can they share some funding of the security and safety aspects that you talked about? And these are some of the practical things that, and then if somebody passes out, there was some voluntary agency which was creating camps there and trying to assist. So you're involving everybody. I just went down a step lower to say that all these things happened that time. And then in 2012, I think I remember there was that King Hit and King's Cross. Then this nighttime economy and all those things were discussed. And that's when the Secure Rank, they put funding, and there were 52 across the state. I'm just saying this, this is the right time to talk about what data you need, engage Boxer, and then also public transport options, what can be done, and including buses and other things. And how do you bring in the ride share and the taxi industry into this, so that, it's just not, it's reaching the venue is one way, and then exiting from there during this odd hours is another. And there's all sorts of things. It's just not at the precinct. Then wherever they are going to the destination back, there could be some security safety problems. So all this has to be factored in. That's why I asked this question. Thank you for providing me this opportunity. Thank you very much. But it's a great job done, sir. It's a great job done. Thank you. Right.
Excellent.
Next, I just wanted to, you did touch on evaluation then, but Cynthia, would you like to follow up with any further questions on evaluation?
Yes, thank you. I'm from Liquor and Gaming. I'm now in the policy team. My question is for Natalie. When the evaluation of the first range will be done?
That's a good question. So we're working again with Mike's team, and it will be an evaluation of all of the reforms across government. So there's a working group that's been set up to actually sort of map out and plan that evaluation. So Mike's team's largely leading that, but we'll play a key role in that. So I think the plan's underway. I don't know if you've got any more details, Mike, but it's certainly from the outset we built in the evaluation component. Mike mentioned the data, but we are working on how that will roll out over the next couple of years.
And Sharon.
Hi, I'm Sharon Owens. I'm from the container deposit team, so the 10-cent cash for cans sort of team in the EPA. I'm just curious about what your tranche 2 reforms are going to look like, and will they be similarly fast-tracked? And I suppose the lens that I'm looking at that from is we are working engaging with the wine industry at the moment on some reforms, and so we're just curious about what was coming up and whether that would particularly affect any kind of wine producers. But more generally, what's coming up?
I think it's a question of you might get different answers depending on who you ask on this one. But definitely it's worth maybe connecting offline so that you get a more sensible answer, or can keep track of where we are. Maybe I'll go back a step and just say that and why, in my mind, this is about increasing capacity, essentially, like how the city can trade. There comes a point in time where you have enough capacity for anything, right? Like the example I always use is there's no point flying 50 planes to Launceston every day if there's no demand for 50 flights to Launceston, right? So the market will work out how much it needs. I mention that because we have to balance introducing more reforms at the same time as making sure that the current reform agenda is being implemented. And, there's, I guess we're in some of the nitty gritty of the implementation at the moment. The minister's very keen to see more reform passed, and I think that the working model is to go again this year in I think the spring session maybe for legislation. But yeah, I think it is a bit of a balancing act, and ultimately it's on my pay grade, like the minister and the cabinet will decide. But the thing that I would be advising them is that this all works because you maintain stakeholder belief, and so if you lose that, i.e. if we've implemented reforms and people don't see the benefit of it, then going again, is that a priority, or is making sure what we've created implemented and is delivering results? So it's a bit of a balancing act, I think, Sharon. In terms of the wine industry in particular, like it's one of the challenges with this whole agenda is that the various participants downstream are either getting benefits or not. And by that, what I'm saying is that we are making it easier for venues to trade. If we make it easier for venues to trade, it should, in theory, improve things for suppliers. But one of the challenges with the sector, and what my job is largely about, is to try to get people to understand that the win is when more people are out consuming, and not just alcohol, but consuming entertainment and fun. I think particularly when you get to the wine industry and the packaged liquor section, it's that they don't necessarily see that, partly because they are benefiting from at-home consumption, so that's a bit of a sticky one in some regards.
No, thank you. That's great. We'll reach out if we need to. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have time for a few more questions, so please keep them coming. But I wanted to go back to some things you said in your presentation, Michael, about identifying the problem. And you said you did spend a bit of time on this issue. I wanted you to talk a little bit more about how you went about identifying the problem, but also the solutions as well, because whilst it might be possible for everyone to broadly agree that there's a problem, the fixing of the problem can be as contentious in itself. So what was the process that you went through with that step?
Yeah, on the problem statement, it was a process of multiple sleepless nights because the minister was hounding me for this problem statement, and I felt much like a university student who hasn't commenced their homework for about a week, as I was ruminating over what problem we're actually trying to fix. And there was a slide that we used in the consultation that didn't come up today, but it's basically a jigsaw puzzle of all the interlocking regulation across, and Liquor Act, obviously, but then EPA, Local Government Act, like code. It's overgrown, and that's why no one had ever tried to fix it. Like this is I don't think we've seen a reform agenda like this ever in living memory. Someone can correct me, but for this sector, in terms of the solutions, I think it's a good question because it teased out what I think might resonate with people on this call, is that when the secretaries were convened, the bit of the direction, I may be misquoting, but it's a bit like, this is what the direction that we're trying to go in. We've got a bit of a problem statement, but what else have you got that you've been sitting on that might be relevant to this agenda that we can, fold on to the train that was leaving the station, mainly because it had already been loaded up with the work that Nat's team had done on the Liquor Act, which I think would have proceeded through its own legislative process, all things being equal, in any case. And so it was a bit, the kitchen sink came out from all over the place, and even things that were not purely regulatory or requiring, an act of parliament to be addressed kind of were thought about. So there's a few things that we didn't want to bog people down into too much detail, but there's a fair bit of guidelines being redeveloped, to give guidance to councils on matters that, practice has just overtaken what the law actually says, for example. So there's that finding solutions was really a function of the willingness of, the senior bureaucracy to say, yeah, well, here's a great opportunity, let's go and get it done. And I kind of come back to that point as well, because it's a bit like our first album's been a hit, would be how I'd put it. Like if you look around the table at the Steerco, and it would be similar at Working Group, but I think we very rapidly built a great rapport with Lucy Hardis at the Cabinet Office, and that helped. I think that there's a lot of love, I think, at least from our team to Nat and her team, and we really feel like we're part of one team, so, and those people dynamics are so important, and even as I'm thinking about convening the group again, Lucy is on maternity leave, a couple of other people have moved around, and so how do you build that teamwork element again? Because I think if people are united and can see the opportunity to work together, sounds tried all of this, I get it, but then you get these types of outcomes that people are telling us are incredible. Without that people piece, it would be harder. And I think that's reflected as well at minister level. The ministers involved tend to get on. And I can't really speak for the secretaries, but they seem to have a pretty good, working relationship as well, from what I've witnessed. So I think that, the solutions we've come up, are they logical, or are they a function of, just good working, empathetic relationships? It's a don't go write a thesis on
it. Definitely. If you want a few more sleepless nights. Look, rapport. I've never heard someone describe it as rapport, but I know there is quite some policy literature on building a coalition of supporters to achieve complex reform. So I definitely agree that there is necessary, really, to do policy reform well, is that. Natalie, I just want to turn to you before we have a question from Marie on nighttime workers. But before we get to that, I wanted to ask about that that drawer full of fantastic ideas that you've got there. How did you go about sorting through, what was right to put on the table, and what were the things that you were going to leave in the top drawer for a future reform timeframe?
Sure. So look, I think a few things with that. The reforms that had lots of support from all stakeholders. So in the liquor space, it's often quite contentious. You have, you've got your sort of harm minimisation groups, you've got industry, and we always need to balance the industry development with harm minimisation. So it's really trying to navigate those areas. So those reforms that we could link to the government's agenda, which had support and that we kind of knew made sense, they'd been around for a while, went through straight away. Some of the others we challenged ourselves and sort of built on them and went, well, government wants to go in this direction. How can we build on what we've got and tweak those reform ideas to actually, sort of shift the dial a little bit? So we progress those, and those areas that we hadn't consulted on in depth, which was the sound and noise, you know, going to one agency, having a more streamlined community input process. That's where Mike was talking about that sort of media approach really assisted with that. And the other part was around safety. And so part of yes, it was all about driving the nighttime economy, but not at the expense of safety. So anything that also gave our compliance officers more tools in their toolkit to, you know, work with licensees that might not be doing the right thing. We were able to weave all that in together and have it in a theme. So I think really the takeout for me was if you can theme it to meet that agenda, give it a go and try and get it in there. And that's really how we did it. And the ones that we've left for the next tranche are the more complicated ones, like aligning the liquor and planning systems. That's a really tricky one, and I'm not sure how we're going to get there, but we will one day. Thanks.
And we have time, I think, for one more question. Marie, would you like to come on and ask about nighttime workers?
Hi, everyone. I work with the Office of Responsible Gambling, but my question's not totally related to that. I just wanted to congratulate you first on your first album. It's definitely a big hit, so congratulations. We're all buying it. Such a complex piece of work, so really congratulations on taking that on. And I can see that you and Nat and everyone's just got a real shared vision. I think that kind of probably helped with the collaborative approach. There was some real solidarity around what that vision entailed, and really much needed piece of reform. I'm passionate about this because I come from a Mediterranean background, so nightlife's embedded in the DNA. It's going out, it's the food, and the drinking and the food is combined at all times with the dancing and the music. It's in bars and it's public spaces. So that whole thing around the economy to me is also about the social cohesion it brings, and that's the safety element, that it's a public space for everyone. So there's kind of like the culture evolves to the point where you don't want it to be a danger for anyone because you want to have a good time. So that becomes embedded. So that's really good to see that whole approach around safety being a part of that. And the creativity, it just sparks creativity to have that in place. But my question around the great thing that you've done in recognising nighttime workers and what that means in terms of their ability to have the right conditions and safety. So if you were to look at the issues, I'm just looking at it from, I know with the Office of Responsible Gambling, we know that gambling becomes more of an issue late at night. So what does that mean for nighttime workers if they're taking that on as part of their responsibility? But then there's also the drinking and all of that. So who would be leading that component of this huge complex reform?
Yeah, so that's our office, Marie. And what we're using in the short term is our own 24-hour economy strategy is getting refreshed. So it will have a strand that is dedicated to night workers. We're also doing a bit of, it's really baselining data piece. One of the first problems we've worked out is that no one tracks this in the way that, and part of the thinking, although I acknowledge the sort of validity of what you've suggested around people working in those environments, but the provocation is, why should anyone have any less amenity of a city because of the hours of which they are asked to or forced to work? That's the, you know, and my thinking is if we can solve for the late night worker, we will solve a lot for the late night reveller. And some of the things like, a good example of an outcome from this would be late night dining, hard to find food late at night. Bakeries start early in the morning. If bakeries had better sense of late night party goers being out and we're able to start dishing out banh mi's at 3 a.m, it'd be a great business, you know, like that's the kind of positive outcome that we are hoping to see. But if it's helpful, reach out. We can, you know, consult with you as we go about that work as well. That'd be great.
So many fascinating insights. I wanted to thank Natalie and Michael for their time today and for such a kind of a genuine discussion of policy intent and policy outcomes. our audience, thank you for your interest and enthusiasm for policy, and we'll be back after a break in April. Hopefully you'll get an opportunity to share in the nighttime economy between now and then, and until then, take care.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Louisa, for hosting us as well.
Great. Thank you so much.